Hey, welcome back to the SoccerWire Podcast. We're coming to you live from the Baltimore Convention Center at the United Soccer Coaches Convention on Friday, January 17th, 2020. I'm producer, editor, and now fill-in host Bridget Baker, and I'm joined by SoccerWire founder Chris Hummer, the man of many hats, Charles Boehm, and we're joined today by special guest, the Baltimore legend, Santino Quaranta. All right, let's get right into it. Our guest today is a former DC United player, U.S. men's national team player. He founded Pipeline SC here in Baltimore, and he's currently coaching, and he holds his A license. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Perfect. I'm sure you've been busy so far at the convention, so thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We're thrilled to have you on today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, first question for Santino, did you walk here from home, or it's so close, or how far are you now?
Whenever these things are announced in Baltimore, I know it's going to be a busy week. It's a fun week because you get to see a lot of people, right? But, I'm about 20 minutes outside the city. It's always fun here.
So you were one of the first people I thought of about having on the podcast because for me, you're Mr. Baltimore soccer. Of people that have been around that know the game, the youth game. That you've stayed here. You stayed true to here. I'd imagine we might get into this later, but you could probably be coaching almost anywhere in MLS if you wanted, and you've decided several years ago when you had a family to put down roots and in your post-professional career, make Baltimore a home and see what you could do for the youth game, and that's certainly admirable. And
yeah, this place is obviously special. It's a place where your roots are, so the type of people, the place is really special. So I'm obviously proud to be here.
Great. So, I have Charlie Boehm here with me too, and we can talk about a lot of things. We can do them in any order that you want. A couple of topics we want to cover is, I was saying in the pre-show with you that you were at the time the youngest player ever drafted in MLS when you started.
The Freddie Adu before there was a Freddie Adu. The record breaker.
Yeah.
You made your debut at 16 and change, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
MLS first team debut.
And it's funny, DC United they signed the first three youngest players ever, right? It was Bobby Convey, then you, and then later Freddie, and now we were saying earlier that the women's game is kind of where the men's game was then, right? So you've now had two more players come out early and go pro yesterday at the NWSL draft that could have stayed in college, At the time you did it, there's very few teenagers in American soccer, although it was still very prevalent to have 18-year-olds playing, in Europe and so forth. But, just could you sort of talk about that time and how did that? You were just playing a little bit of high school soccer somewhere and playing club and played in the Jefferson Cup. How did it happen? How did one get discovered for youth national teams and professional prospects?
Well, just to go over answer kind of the first part of the question. I think that the organization has a lot to do with it, the approach, the mentality, the kind of thinking outside the box. And Kevin Payne was a big part of that draft process and looking to get younger, right? In MLS, and there was a lot of older players, right? And it was kind of like the generation where guys were in Europe or they come back or they didn't quite make it, and that was kind of the generation. And when Kevin, I was actually with him yesterday here, and he's a fantastic guy. He was someone that I still look up to today. It's interesting because nowadays it's kind of the norm, right? And but back then it wasn't, right? My process was a little different than it is nowadays. The resources weren't as prevalent. You have I played in high school. John Ellinger, he kind of sees me. He's from the area. He invites me to residency down at IMG Academy.
At the time, he was running that, right?
He was running that, but that's kind of the shortened version of it. But it wasn't there wasn't DAs. There weren't. This was just club-based ODP, very, very straightforward black and white pathway. Now there's so many different ways to, whether it's the collegiate route, whether it's the academy route, whether it's the, Philadelphia Unions who house the players. It's Sporting Kansas City's, the DC United routes. There's so many different ways to get to where you want to go. So back then it wasn't. It was a little different. So
So you put yourself in the shoes of one of these many now young players that are getting signed right out of academies now and so forth. You may not know this because you're not maybe in those locker rooms today, but what was it like? Can you just tell? Is there a story? Did you have a mentor at DC United that put you under their wing, or was it like, we're going to beat you up if you don't do what you're supposed to?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll tell you the funny version of it is I think that this was a public story. When my first training at DC United, I still wasn't able to drive, so I didn't have my license yet, and so my mom drove me down, and I was really nervous, obviously, and she had always. Whatever, it was a long drive, right? Down 295, it's like you're thinking a lot about my first training. I wonder how the guys are and older. So I was nervous. So when we pull up to RFK, I was thinking in my head, I was like, listen, Mom, you got to drop me off way back here. Because if these guys see you drop me off, that's the first thing they're going to make fun of me and say, your mom dropped you off at training, bud. And so I made her drop me off about a half a mile away right at the entrance, and I went all the way up, walked up, and I said, go ahead, get out of here, drive the car away so nobody sees. And walk up to RFK's doors, and that was that, But
sounds like every middle school kid getting dropped off too.
Yeah, that's kind of how that's how my first interaction with RFK was.
Had you had a chance to meet any of the players before that first day?
None, zero.
Wow.
So when I walked, we can talk about the way I was brought up in East Baltimore. It was you had to be tougher, right? And the way that things were, the way that you were brought up was a little different than normal kids just walking in RFK Stadium. So I wasn't uncomfortable doing it, but what I was very nervous. And so the funny part about walking in that day was not knowing what it was, what the trainings were like, understanding what being a professional is, all the things that I just had no idea about. And then the older guys, I started to figure out who they were, and they took me under their wing, That's how it worked.
So it's always hard to ask for one piece of advice, two pieces of advice, but, there again, like I said before, probably every season now, there's probably 24, not quite as young. They probably are 16, 17 now, but you've got a lot of 17-year-olds. And the other part was they're already familiar with it, because usually if you get signed from the academy, you've already trained with the first team once or twice or a couple times. But is for any young player that walks into a professional environment for the first time, is there one or two things, like pieces? Is it grit? Is it attitude? Is it anything?
I'll tell you the most important thing that I was taught growing up and playing in East Baltimore was this: is you always had to respect the older guys, okay? And that was set standard across the board. All right, and whether they were good, bad, indifferent, didn't matter. You have respect for these guys. They tell you to get off the field, and you get off the field. You can have an attitude about it, but you're still going to do it. What I see now is these kids are treated really well at a young age, and I think that there's not enough uncomfortable players that are in these environments that are battle tested. At 12 years old, long sleeve shirts. They have kitmen in these places at 12 years old. We struggled to have nice fields to play on at 12 years old. And that's not like the older guys saying they have it so well. That's because I was that guy when I was 16, when the older guys were complaining about MLS in 1996 when I came in, right? So do you understand what I mean? It's not about, but for me, the one piece of advice, it has nothing to do with soccer or grit or anything else, because look, if you've made it that far, you got to have something. But for me, it's about the respect, and the respect that I had for Jaime Moreno, Marco Echeverri, Ben Olsen. That was just standard protocol, and that's why they took me under their wing. They didn't see me as a guy who was going to come in and disrespect them. Now, on the field, I was dangerous. You can be arrogant, you can be fun, and have some flair and do everything else. But when push come to shove, that was standard protocol. Being respectful to the older guys, and I think that that's important.
So, Tino, I know your experience was different from Freddie's, but there's some similarities maybe, because Freddie's talked in latter years about how he's like, the guys in the locker room are all over me. Like, they get on me for the dumbest stuff, and he kind of suggested that maybe the older dudes are threatened by the youth movement that you guys were at the forefront of. Did you ever feel that? Were you like getting balled out and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's not being threatened. It's standard protocol across the world. That's standard protocol to have guys that are tough on you, hard on you, and tell you like it is, right? And that's my foundation in Baltimore City. It's standard protocol. 2 versus 2, 3 versus 3. Like, the guys, if you're not good enough, then get off. Get off the field, and the next guy who was in line was running on the blacktop to play. And so when guys yell at you, it's okay. And I think that's a great point that you bring up about Freddie. Maybe the foundation that he had wasn't like mine. right? Maybe the guys and the respect and the understanding what that is, maybe it wasn't the same. And so for me, I was okay with guys yelling, and I would yell back. But again, at the end of the day, you learn, you understand, and it's a respect. It's hard for me to explain what the respect is, but they understood my respect towards them.
But I've heard what you're saying in a multiple. It's easy to sound like, hey, get off my lawn,
Sure.
old guys. But coaches, college coaches, like real big people in this game, look at younger generations of players, and they don't always see. And even Brian McBride alluded to it in a conference call he did with media about the last couple of years of this men's national team. Like, is the fight, is the will, the resilience always there? Because right now you can get on a pro pathway so early, and maybe the hard knocks don't come later, or they maybe don't come at all.
Sure. I mean, think about look, when I was called into a national team, maybe I was making $100,000. We got guys getting called into the national team that are making millions of dollars. So for me, the bonus is everything, trying to make it to the top. You die for everything. When you have guys that are now, this isn't the norm. We're just getting into a world where guys are in Europe, they're making big money. Even in MLS, young guys are doing really well with initial contracts. Adidas, it's different. So is the foundation being set by the leaders, the coaches, the environments that are created? Is it tough enough? Is it cutthroat enough? Are we telling kids you don't have to win until 12 or 13, don't worry about it? And so for me, again, that's not the way I was brought up, and it's not the environments that I create for my players now, even at 7 and 8 and 9 years old. Because I think that the biggest debate, you know this, is development versus winning versus, don't you think they go hand in hand? I mean, this is a culture where, sure, to win at all cost in a terrible way with young kids and kicking ball. Nobody's talking about that. I'm talking about creating a winning mentality in training in a respectful way that kids compete. So when they hit 12, 13, 14 years old and the demands are more, and they go into an MLS academy and the demands are more, they don't fall off. Okay, so I think the environments, the foundations are crucially important, and that's what has to change.
You talked about the youth game a little bit. One of the things I wanted to bring up, and then we can move on to some other topics, like your growth of Pipeline and the youth market in DC. But there are other parts of the country that are like this. But Baltimore has a reputation for having really high level high school soccer,
Sure.
and it's mostly the private school leagues, if I'm right.
Absolutely.
But it's certainly created some difficulties in the development academy's rules about not playing high school and so forth. But do you have some sort of feeling about how high school soccer in Baltimore might add to the growth of a player, or maybe some advice in that area? Why is it so good?
I think that each player's situation is different, right? I think that 99.9% of these players are going to essentially go off and play high school or college. It's the 1%ers that we constantly debate about, right? The high school versus DA versus ECNL. I mean, there's so many factors, and I treat each factor on an individual basis, right? Finances, family situation, travel situation. There's so many factors that go into it, so it's a broadened conversation, right? And so we treat each case on an individual basis. I'm not going to sell a player to not play high school because we need a number. If it has to be 16 instead of 17 and that player makes sense for them to play high school, then I'm going to do it. And I'm very, very blunt about that. On some of our rosters in the fall, we have 14 players, 15 players, and there's vertical integration from the younger players because it makes sense for some of our DA players to play high school. And that's just the bottom line.
I love this topic because I remember in the early years of the DA and when the 10-month season came in and they because and again, this doesn't seem that long ago to me, but we got listeners that may not have been around for this stuff. Like, you had a Baltimore team in one of the first couple of years, national championship contenders, reaching the semifinals of the DA with Baltimore talent, and then they passed that no high school rule, and it just drops. Like, I think it was Bay's Chelsea. Yeah. Baltimore-based Chelsea had ballers.
Did they win it the first year? They won the DA. They won.
Maybe so. I can't remember if I know they were in the final, the quarter, the cup at the end of the year, and it was so hard to explain. It was almost like I said, like, this is the soccer version of The Wire, because there's this culture in Baltimore that's different.
Another Baltimore gem.
Like, you gotta have you gotta understand the rules are different in Baltimore, and there's kids getting full ride scholarships to great schools based on playing high school ball. You can't just tell them, like, yes, the federation has decided in its wisdom that your life has to change dramatically in order to meet this thing we're doing, and it was so controversial. And it took years for Baltimore and Maryland in general to have any presence in the DA, like almost a decade, because of this very unique culture. And I thought it was an early experience for me in the youth game of like, this had to be a it depends kind of answer, but a lot of the governing bodies in this country don't necessarily have that mentality. They have the decrees and rules, and this is how it's going to be from on high, right?
You can't make decisions from 30,000 feet, and for us that are in the trenches, each market is different, right? Even for us in this state here, the player pool in Howard County is different than a player pool in Baltimore because of the private school versus the public school. Great public schools down there. The soccer isn't, sure, you have the Centennials and the Wild Lakes, but the masses in Baltimore are so accustomed from a family standpoint and from a generational standpoint, the Archbishop Curleys, the McDonoughs, the Coward Halls. This is ingrained in the families. And so it's kind of breaking now saying, okay, high school versus DA. Look, we could sit and talk for hours about this. And again, Baltimore is a unique place, and it's unique in the sense that the private schools are fantastic, the education's fantastic, and that's first and foremost. And if that checks boxes for players, then they have to make sure that that's covered. For national team players that have potential, they're going to have to make a decision at some point. What is really important in terms of their progression? And again, they're few and far between, because that's on an individual basis. This is one out of 10,000 players that come through, right?
All right, let's go ahead and take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to keep talking with Santino more about how he's worked in his career on developing players and also growing pipeline.
SoccerWire is the place for prospective recruits to list themselves and promote their profile to thousands of daily readers, including college coaches, scouts, and more. All recruits can list themselves for life for a small one-time fee. Already committed? Congratulations! All commitments can be reported for free and are included in our nationwide soccer recruiting and tournament wire to over 65,000 people each Thursday. Visit SoccerWire.com to create your player profile today.
All right, and we are back with Santino.
All right, San, on that end of that last segment, we were really starting to dig into how each market is different, each player is different, and so forth. People can read more about your story on SoccerWire as well, but Pipeline is a club that you started with Sean Rush 7 years ago?
2011.
2011.
Yes.
So, Pipeline has teams in almost every age bracket in the Jefferson Cup, which is one of the best tournaments in the country. And you guys essentially started from scratch. I mean, everybody starts somewhere. Obviously, there were some teams that were probably developed elsewhere that came in and changed their name and so forth. But nobody can argue, however things get going, that you and Sean have created something that is identifying good talent, developing good talent, and has solid. You mentioned vertical integration before and so forth. So a lot of our listeners and readers are all about this. It's almost a cliche buzzword now. We develop players. Everybody's mission statement. We develop players. Do you? So where does it start? Does it start with identifying the right talent early, or are you really like anybody who's got the grit and the personality, we're going to develop you?
So what we decided early on was we wanted to develop a culture, and that culture included the training facilities, kids training in the same gear, the brand, what you're willing to do for the brand, who coaches the brand, and what that environment looks like from the foundation. Not bring in the best players who are just putting on a shirt. It was to start from scratch, create people say this a lot, but create a culture of, from the top. Our work rate was again, we put a lot of work in, because we were competing against the Baltimore Bays, they were the number one club in the country, as we talked about earlier, and they did a great job. But we just thought, from our approach, it was young, it was innovative, it was kind of changing, looking at the second-tier player and giving them what they needed as well. And also it was about the jersey, the jackets, were kids going to wear this to school and be proud of what they were wearing. And that was a big part of it, and this might sound crazy, but it was about being cool. and having fun. And we were young guys who didn't really know a lot about the landscape, and we were going up against a giant. And we didn't want to take anybody down. That wasn't we knew who we were. It was hard at times to get smashed by some of these teams, but we always stayed the course. And my partner, Sean, he does so much on the business side, the marketing side, and we created this bond that the on-the-field stuff, the soccer curriculum, I started to learn more and more, because coming out as a player, I didn't know how to manage kids or parents, because I was expecting them to have a first touch just like I did, right? And that's not reasonable. And so my growth as a coach and going through courses and just learning the skills to manage players and how you kind of create this culture was really, really hard, right? Because coming from DC United's locker room to go into deal with little kids at 7, 8, 9 years old and create a culture, it's hard. And so especially in an environment that's really cutthroat. And so that was really important to establish a base. It wasn't even about talent yet. It was about who we were first and foremost. And then the talent slowly started to come in, and there was a transition from this player, and then we started to get this coach that we really wanted, and it was a slow build.
So you mentioned coaching licenses as well. Did you start your coaching license journey around the same time you started the club?
I didn't. I didn't really know about that. In complete, like, just being honest, I didn't know what. I thought it was. I just didn't know what it was. I thought it was just a diploma or something you get online, and so I knew that the guys at DC United would tell me, like, hey, you should take this course. Back when, like, Benny and those guys did it with Bruce, and I was. But it was, again, now it's changed the way that stuff is done, and so I started my B license down at IMG. Started to learn, and then went through the whole A license and the modernized A, where it was kind of a couple different times that we went, and it was great.
You were able to jump right into the B because of your national team background?
Yeah, so it was all former players. Guys were from England. It was I learned a lot there, actually, and we all did, because we were all former players, but it was about, again, learning how to manage. I say that a lot because that's a big part of it for me.
Tina, you're touching on a topic that I hear a lot, which is people say we need to keep our players in the game, move them into another phase as coaches or executives. But then there's others, a lot of really respected youth coaches kind of cut in and say, hold on, just because you're a great player does not mean you mean a great coach. It is a fundamentally different job with a whole different skill set, and you have to, Tab Ramos has talked about, I had to start over and learn a new trade. What was your experience like in that regard?
Exactly the same. Understanding tactically how to play in a 3-5-2 or a 4-3-3. I understood my individual role and responsibility as a right winger, but I didn't understand the collective needs or the mental needs and the physical needs of what players actually needed that weren't professionals, right? So we're talking about players that they're not going to be professionals. So how do I get the most out of them, manage these kids, players, older kids, and do you treat them all the same? Do you treat them different individually? And so you have to start to learn this, and Tab's 100% right. You start over. You're starting basically from scratch, and it wasn't fun in the beginning at times because some of the players weren't great, and your expectations when coming from a player are you should be better than this. Right?
And you're working nights and weekends.
Sure, and that was that was the biggest difference, is go to training at RFK, come back home, take a nap, no problem, and then Saturday get ready for the game, off Sunday, Monday maybe. Now it's Saturday mornings, you're at games, Sunday afternoons, and it was like, wait a second,
this is real work.
This is a lot. Yeah.
You briefly, I want to come back to the parents comment because that's probably also, you could argue whether you need to get a coaching license or not to be a successful coach, but to be a successful youth coach, you do need to learn how to interact and manage parents. Yeah,
sure. It's the most important thing, and you, for me as a father of a son and a daughter, you would think you put yourself in how would I want my son or my daughter to be kind of treated as from a coach or a leader or a teacher. And so I didn't always do that in the beginning, right? Because it's hard. And so again, you make mistakes along the way, apologize along the way. But for me now, again, it's that is the single most important feature about being a top quality coach at any level is the way that you interact and manage with kids and players. That's the most important piece.
And we should point out you are a soccer dad as well. Your oldest is going off to Loyola?
She just committed to Loyola University, which was It was great because, again, she had options to go other places. She's a great kid, really smart kid who was driven, played in a DA, made some sacrifices, and was rewarded in the end. Joe Malia, who is now the coach at Loyola University, is a tremendous man. We were really happy as a family for her to obviously be local and still get a great education. So it's, soccer dad, I guess you could say. That's right.
How did your perspective on this landscape as a whole change when you had a kid get into the elite game?
Yeah, you see and you understand a lot of different things, and the real, I want to say, failures in this country, and even in the recruiting process, and what coaches are looking for compared to what I see, and reality versus, kids wanting to go to UNC that certainly shouldn't be looking at UNC, and I understood as a father, for me, this was about a process of, I told her from day one, I'm not going to make calls for you. I'm not going to call coaches. You're going to do this whole thing on your own. I'll guide you along the way, help you, whatever you need. But this process is going to be done on your own. And that was what was happening for me when I was a kid, and you create your own pathway. Not because you're Santino's daughter are you going to go to UNC or UCLA or anywhere else. You're going to be realistic about what you want. And this is the same mentality I try to give the other kids, is create a pathway for yourself. It doesn't have to be the top school because Loyola is mid-major. It's a great place for her. But, again, these are all things that I had to learn and mature as not only as a father but as a leader and a teacher in the game.
You have had a lot of players in the DA that are probably considering school, and you do need to get involved as a director or coach of them. Do you have any advice or stories about, a player making the right decision or the wrong decision, or a coach misunderstanding a player, or a coach that you think and know in your heart is a great fit, but the coach at the school just isn't seeing it, and how you maybe convince them? Or
It's very difficult, and it's a great question, and it's very, very hard because if you look at the transfer portal in Division I, it's astronomical in the amount of kids that are transferring from these schools, and I talk to a lot of college coaches. What I tell kids is make sure that this decision isn't about Instagram or putting that logo for everybody to like it, because tomorrow they're going to forget, and then you're there. And make sure the boxes that we create and try and check off are for the right reasons. The size of the school, private versus, is it bigger, is it smaller? And we try and create this and help the process. I'm brutally honest, not to a fault, but again, I can always say, like, this is what we talked about, and I believe in what I say. And so parents might not always like to hear it, because some coaches will tell Sally that she can go to UNC and play in flip-flops when she should be a Division III school to get them into the club. Whereas I would say she's certainly not ready to play at UNC. You like that one, flip-flops.
Yeah.
I didn't know Anson allowed that.
Yeah. It's wild, though, the power. You mentioned UNC, and that's the Exhibit A, but it's not the only one, but like the power that certain crest or logo has in this game.
Amazing. Incredible. I mean, again, ID camps, the amount of questions and the guidance that we have to give. We have 6th, 7th grade kids asking, which ID camp should I go to? You're not even in high school yet. You know what I mean? But again, just start to think about, like, just small little things about size of school versus where do you want to go? How can you know where you want to go in 7th grade? It's impossible. So I'm a little bit slower in the process, and so was my daughter Liv, and maybe to a fault. Maybe been more aggressive, but I'm thrilled the way it turned out.
What age did she start focusing heavy on the recruitment process?
Everybody kept telling me, you got to pick it up. You got to pick the recruiting process up and start to be more aggressive. And it's funny because I talked to Karen Cabrera about this at Navy, and she said, San, I did the same thing. With her daughter Talia, she said, we just waited, we were more patient, and you start to see kids commit. And I think it's maybe because we have a realistic, as coaches and former players, a realistic understanding of reality, and when players progress and when they should commit and when they're ready. But the rest of the country, and they don't. They're aggressive, they go to ID camps, they commit 8th, 9th grade, and I'm glad they changed the rule. But that's, for her, it was, that freshman and sophomore year, you start to look, and we start to identify places that she liked. The coaching staff was the most important piece. after those boxes were checked in terms of public, private, that kind of stuff.
And you have to wonder how much seeing all of your friends have commitments or teammates, because that's the first thing you do is you post it on social media and you want everyone to see it. You have to wonder how much that plays into kids committing early and maybe to the wrong school or not the right fit for them at that time.
You see it a lot, Chris. And how do you know if it's the right decision in 8th grade? I just don't know how that's possible. But people do it. I support it. I'm obviously not going to tell parents how to parent. I just give my recommendations. That's all.
So, Sant, you didn't play in school yourself, but you're deeply immersed in all the programs and so forth. Do you have an opinion about the buzz about changing the rules in the college game?
Look, I think that from a scientific standpoint, from a health standpoint, they play a lot of games in a short period of time, and even in a youth game, it's a lot physically on these kids. I'm not entrenched in it. I obviously just looking from a player standpoint, from a health standpoint, I think it's great that they would have, and I would support a longer season, but I know that there's way more that goes into it than just from the health standpoint,
And listeners, check out one of our early episodes. I think it was the first or second episode of the SoccerWire podcast. We broke down Sasha Swarovski's proposal, which is going up for a vote, possibly could be adopted as early as this year for implementation 2 years down the road, I believe, for the men's D1 soccer to go to a 2-semester season. Sounds like the women and the lower divisions are not ready yet, but a very interesting situation, and we hope we see some positive developments there.
Well, I hope the women follow if they do it, but I think it's fantastic. It just doesn't make any sense to me what they're doing.
I support Sasha's great, and I think that he has the right mindset, the right mentality. It's just about getting everybody else on board, right?
Has he hit you up? I think he's hit up everybody in the game, and he's given them the elevator pitch. He is just dogged, man. He will not let this go, and I respect the hell out of it.
I agree, man. I support him 100%. I really
It's got to happen from the inside too. To have somebody like that doing it, it's what I mean. You couldn't be outside trying to create that kind of influence.
No, he deals with it on a daily basis. How to get these kids ready for the next. It's so hard, man.
So just real quick, somebody pointed this out to me. Everybody talks about the holiday calendar in England, right? They play all these amount of matches. The fans love it. Games every 3 days. It's brutal for the players. And we're talking about the physiological demands. And then somebody in the college game popped up and said, hey, that's what we do all season. Our season is a 3-month holiday calendar. So those kids just get ground into a pulp.
And they don't get any chance on the training field. I mean, and college isn't necessarily a place to develop a player.
Why can't it be? It should
be,
right?
Right. What I'm saying is if they switch this calendar, that's a good analogy. The U.S. might instantly have the largest sort of pro development league in the world as far as like a minor league system. If they followed the same rules and let the kids play at the right pace, it could actually turn into a much more of a stepping stone.
There's no doubt. But again, so then we can talk about the high school piece now too. So they're playing 30 games. From some of these teams in Baltimore are playing 30 games in a 2.5-month stretch, and then they're coming back to us after high school season, and they're physically beat up, and they're grinded to they're commodities, right? They're using these kids, and they're maximizing everything they can get out of them because they're trying to win a championship or whatever it is. And fair enough, that's okay, but it's a lot of games, even at the high school level. They're playing 30 games in the DA. We're playing 30 games in the whole season. So it's a lot.
So coming back to the youth game in Baltimore, and we can wrap this up with anything else you want to bring up, but we've had conversations in the past about, and we don't have to point fingers or talk about ECNL back in the day, but you've now working with SAC and John Ellinger really been able to partner to have a very strong boys DA and a very strong girls DA. And so now there is a place for the kids in Baltimore that have the talent and the opportunity to play. Do you feel a sense of satisfaction that you finally got a foothold and keeping talent here?
It is. It's always, look, the satisfaction is when you see them, in all honesty, is you see them commit to schools and their families are so happy, and we've had them for years, or a kid gets called into the national team, and it's not because of us, right? It's because of the situation that we try and put them in on a daily basis, the environment that we try and create, and that's the most satisfying part. Look, every year a team from Baltimore usually is a national champion in USYSA. You have quality ECNL teams in the state. You have quality DA teams. There's a lot of talent in the Maryland area, the Baltimore area. So we're proud of what we myself, John, what we've created. But it's a battle every year for players, the ever-changing landscapes. It really is hard because there isn't a clear, and that's the one thing about messaging for us is a clear pathway from a club standpoint, right? You have Baltimore Armor, you have Pipeline, you have SAC, you have all these different options, different tournaments, National League, and it just becomes very hard for parents to grab on and grasp what the best thing is for their kids, what it is, what the best pathway is. And so from a marketing standpoint, we try and not just the top player, but those second and third team players, how do we create a similar environment? How do we give them the same field space as a top group? And that's the one thing when we talked about culture and environment early on in Pipeline, that was very important.
So do you see positives? Because Pathway is a good segue there as well, because, I mean, you have a little conflict of not conflict of interest. What's the word? Where is your heart torn at all? Thinking that, well, the right pathway for that professional player as a sort of community club around that's in the suburbs, if you will, of a major club like a DC United. Do you feel any sort of obligation to have you ever sent a top player from Baltimore Armor to DC United's academy because
yes.
they were one year away from being pro?
Absolutely. Okay. I think that should be standard protocol across the country. I don't have anything at the end of the pyramid that's going to turn a Christian Sordo or players like this into professionals who went to Loudoun, who's had success. These are, for me to hold on to players as long as humanly possible doesn't make sense. Not everybody believes in that. I was given a tremendous opportunity from DC United, and you want other people to experience that. And even if it is just that us to be having one training session or to just experience, it's really, really, that's gratifying. Now the clubs, the DC United, they created the P2P, and it's been very successful because Pipeline now, our younger players go down and train, and they're able to get integrated, and there is conference calls monthly, and they're doing a good job to start to identify and be inclusive with other clubs outside of just the DC United Academy. And it's been, for us, pretty successful because the kids now from Pipeline go on to the GA Cup. They kind of go, and they've done well the last couple of years, so we're excited about that pathway. But I encourage every player, if they can, to strive to be professional.
Just for the listeners, do you have a 30-second version of the PDP?
Yeah, so basically, Pipeline and Baltimore, we're pretty far from DC United, so it's tough for the younger players at 11, 12. DC United obviously has the academies that they're starting a little older now, and so they don't have the 12s.
Yeah, they have 3 teams right
yes,
now.
And so basically when it started with Dave Casper and Ben and Nolan and Gus and Dave, they basically said, how do we integrate players from, and Ryan Martin was at the head of this, how do we integrate players from around the area so we don't feel like we're constantly stealing players, right? They're going and taking your best players and making them drive an hour. Well, the integration was pretty simple, is you create a training environment where you're bringing these kids in weekly, monthly, I think it's twice a month. They get to go in and train. Other kids are brought in, they identify talent. Then they go back into their markets when they're done. There's a conference call about what they did, what the session was like. You know, we talk about players, and there's a culmination at the end of the best, most talented players that go and play in the GA Cup. I think it was in November. And it's just a year-long process that I think is wonderful.
DC United were one of the first MLS teams to get into the youth space, but I hear these over the years, I've heard all these stories about the beef that has sort of simmered because they went in early. Maybe there were missteps, or maybe just people don't like competition, or people don't like their top players being taken, even if it's by a professional club. Have you encountered any of that kind of those sharp elbows maybe, or that territorial aspect of the game?
Yeah, I mean, for DC United early on, it was nothing but negativity, man. It was about, finances, or they weren't good enough, and you had the Bays were beating them in the beginning, and it was this like Baltimore versus DC thing. And for me, that was the last thing that I wanted
awkward,
to create. Yeah, I didn't want to create. That was the last thing. I want to enhance DC, and I was there for years, right? So you want to enhance and bring that market together and marry the markets. It's not easy, but this country there's a lot of territorial. There's a lot of problems, politically driven, inclusive. How do you engage a lot of the top clubs, and what is the criteria to be in certain events? How do you get in a DA? What is the criteria? Coaches, there's a lot of things that we could talk for days about,
Yeah, there certainly is a lot to talk about. Let's take a quick break, and we'll hear a little bit more from Santino before we let him get out of here for the day.
Get your club or league in the game with SoccerWire, the leading community news, advice, and search engine for youth soccer. For a base annual fee, we'll take a huge bite out of your marketing and branding so you can focus more on where the cleats touch the turf. The best part? All the extra branding and benefits are free because the full price of the annual membership is returned to you in advertising credits. We have 3 great options that are sure to meet the marketing and advertising needs of your organization. For more information, visit SoccerWire.com and click Be a Premier Partner under the Premier Partner section on the left side of the page, or email ads@SoccerWire.com. That's ads@SoccerWire.com.
All right, and we're back here with Santino, and we're coming to you from the Jefferson Cup booth here at the USC convention. Santino, you've played in the Jefferson Cup, have had coached a lot of teams that have been in the Jefferson Cup, and you've got
I heard he
some
played
teams.
last year, and they got him for age.
Oh,
he was trying to
the
win.
sticklers, huh?
I tried my card, didn't pass. The referee.
But you've also got some teams that are in it this year. So, walk us through your experience with the Jefferson Cup.
We're obviously thrilled to have Pipeline be a part of the Jefferson Cup. It's a prestigious event. It's one that it culminates. It's like the girls' event of the year. But for me, and I was telling Chris this before, we're really excited now about the boys as well. In the past it was a lot girls, and now the boys side, some of our younger boys teams that are in it, we are thrilled at it's probably our best tournament of the year on the boys side, and that wasn't like that in the past as much, and we've seen over the last, I'd say, 2 or 3 years, it start to really elevate in terms of talent. But from the girls' standpoint, we have a bunch that are in the top tier we're really proud of. I played in it a while back, and again, the prestige, and when you say Jeff Cup, that's just, it's just the top of the heap. The Surf San Diego Surf Cup, the Dallas Cup, and then a Jeff Cup, right? And you see this event, and we're really proud to be a part of it.
Well, we'll be there covering it. We'll sure to keep an eye on those Pipeline teams. Before we let you get out of here, Santino, is there anything that you need to plug?
No plugs. Yeah, I'm not really.
Buy tickets to professional soccer games.
Yeah.
Where can the people find you on social? Where can they find Pipeline?
Pipeline is at Pipeline Soccer Club on Twitter. I'm not a big social media guy. I have a Twitter page, no Facebook, but at Santino. I think it's Santino Q. What is it?
Hold on, I got you.
How uncool am I?
Yeah, at Santino Quaranta. Just the name.
Go. Yeah, that's it.
All right, well, there you have it, guys. Make sure you're following Santino, keeping up with Pipeline, and make sure you're checking out the Jefferson Cup here at the United Soccer Coaches Convention and staying up to date with everything that they've got going on. All right, so that'll do it for today's episode of the SoccerWire Podcast. We'll catch you next time, but until then, make sure you're following us on social media. You can just search SoccerWire on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and now YouTube. Keep up with everything we cover on SoccerWire.com by subscribing to our newsletters at SoccerWire.com/newsletters. For Chris Hummer and Charles Boehm, I'm Bridget Baker saying thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the SoccerWire Podcast.